a $5 Patreon model itself is demeaning in many ways to artists. Not that Patreon is, but there's a mindset that is in that. When you're living in that world, you're automatically saying, what I make is worth $5.
Why do some creators beg for pennies from their audience, while other creators build a community of excited fans who happily support their work? Lennon Bone is a creative strategist who spent 15 years as a professional musician, songwriter, and producer. His playing and writing has been heard in movies and on major TV networks including MTV, CBS, and NBC. Lennon's goal is to help artists and creatives change the way they see their own worth so they can fully step into their creative calling and make a difference with their art. Because your message and your content is more valuable to the world than you realize. Welcome to the Story Greenlight podcast, where we're all about empowering creators like you to tell your stories, connect with your audience, and create the impact that you were put on this planet to make. My name is Jeff Barch. I'm a coach, author, and entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience shaping content for ABC, NBC, Universal, Disney, Apple, and a whole bunch of others. My team and I support YouTube creators with followings in the hundreds to the many millions. At Story Greenlight, we believe that you matter, your message matters, and the world needs to hear what you have to say. Lennon Bone, how are you, dude?
Dude, I'm doing really good. Really good. Yeah, I'm doing really good. I'm going to say this out loud. I don't know if you have to do this with yourself, but I'm trying to be really honest about where I'm at. If somebody asks me that question, it's really easy for us to say, well, I'm doing good, and you're not. So I want you to know that's a really honest answer.
I really hear that because I don't know, maybe it's the Western European Germanic background in me, but whenever I go into the South or a Southern-driven culture where the requirement for interacting with any other human being is, well, hi, how are you? I'm fine, thanks. And you? Oh, I'm good, thanks. Thank you so much. And I'm just going, I want my 15 seconds back, damn it.
It's a culture. Like my family, it's like their whole thing was they could be straight pissed at you and
they would lie to your face.
Oh yeah. Or you wouldn't, but it's like the worst lie ever. They'd say, oh, no. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. And you're like, oh, okay. I see where we're at here. So yeah, that Southern culture, my wife's very East Coast. So she's much more cut and dry. And a lot of my Midwestern friends at first didn't know how to handle her. And I'm trying to embrace more of that East Coast thing. So,
well, given your honesty in what some other people might call small talk, I mean, the fact of the matter is you are right in the middle of something really cool right now that a lot of people dream about doing. And here you are, you're actually doing it. So yeah, that's really cool. And to be able to say that you're doing well, as opposed to I'm looking for the nearest window to jump out, or I feel like my soul is on fire, or something like that.
Yeah.
So for folks who aren't familiar with you, let's dive into your story. Where are you now, and how did you get here?
I am currently what I've deemed as, I don't know how else to describe it, a creative strategist. And that road was a windy one, to say the least. Mm-hmm. I started my whole creative thing at a really young age, like just being really creative. My dad's a bass player. My mom had a real knack for you could throw a pile of anything that you wanted onto the living room floor, and she could decorate a whole house with it and just make it look super cool. She was just one of those types of people that you just kind of like, how do you take a bunch of random crap and make it interesting, make it look beautiful? And so I at an early age got into music and just decided that I wanted to go full bore into that. And so I, at about 16, 15 or 16, started touring with a drum and bugle corps. And if anybody out there is a nerd like myself, this is sort of like professional marching band. You go and you audition, and then you tour 3 months out of the year, and you compete. And at the time that I was in, the one I was in, I think we were like 7th in the world, something like that.
Oh,
so
nice.
Just being in close proximity to other people a lot. So at 16, 17 years old, I'm learning right away, like, being in a professional environment in a musical sense is as much about getting along with people as it is being good at your craft. And I was one of those people that had to work my butt off to be good at my craft. Like, I was not naturally gifted. I just felt like I was always having to really try. And I was just kind of challenged on the flip side of that by having, mom was also going through a lot of like alcohol. She went through alcoholism. She was an alcoholic who later recovered, but that led to all kinds of other things in my life. And so at college age, I decided to skip college and started playing in bands. And then next thing I knew, I was touring, and I toured for 10 years. And we went, I think, toured 13, 14 countries, something like that. And got to be on television and do, just a bunch of random stuff, play a ton of major festivals, and, hit some sort of kind of mid-level stride where you're not like a household name by any means, but you can go and draw, a couple hundred to 500-600 people, depending on the market. So it was really an interesting trajectory. And by the time that was kind of drawn to a close for me, we had our first kiddo, and I was like, I don't think I want to be in Europe when I have a little like girl at home and can't really, interact with what's happening. And so, and I was just feeling this pull of, I want to do something that where I get to make the decision, because I felt this guilt whenever it's like, I don't want to go do that thing. And everybody else is like, well, I think we should, and then you feel guilty, like, well, am I holding everybody back?
Yeah.
And on top of that, I think I was becoming somebody that I didn't really want to be completely transparent. I was started to drink a lot and get into like a lot of depression, and just feeling like, this is not the person that I wanted to be. And so left all that, went into doing studio work, doing like engineering and production for bands, and had a lot of conversations around like, how did you do this? How did you guys like figure out how to build an audience and make money and all these kinds of things? And so I started a YouTube channel, as apparently everybody does now. And
how many YouTube channels are out there, would you say, at this point?
Oh my gosh, I don't even.
Any ballpark idea? I saw an article on HubSpot saying something to the effect that the comparison between blogs and YouTube channels and podcasts, it's just an order of magnitude, but in reverse. So like 800 million blogs, 80 million YouTube channels or something, or I don't know, and like maybe 2 million podcasts.
Yeah. So I looked at it just now, as of January 24th, or January 24th. That's not even happened. January 4th, 2022, over 37 million.
Okay.
Like still an insane amount of channels out there. And I'm sure there's been way more than that. It's just how many of them have been deleted or all that. So I started a channel to basically help my clients, say, here's some business side of things for musicians. And then I kind of just felt like I was competing in a smaller market. I live in Kansas City, competing with people that I didn't want to compete with. And I knew that I would always have to do that in the producer role. And so took a job with a guy by the name of Tim Schmoyer as a strategist. And so there's a company called Video Creators, whom you just had him on the show recently. And he was kind enough to kind of throw me in weeds. And I learned a ton about marketing and business in the online space. And I thought, how do I marry these two ideas? How do I bring the old model of just being in the industry from a very personal standpoint, and then also bringing that to like the online space. How can I bring those two things together? And so here we are. I left Video Creators about 2 weeks ago, and am now doing that very thing.
When it comes to creative people, there's a lot of time that the things that we do with our creativity becomes very closely identified with our own identity and who we are. And sometimes to the point where it's hard to separate the two. You just described this path where you were going through all these different stages. How did you see your identity change throughout those different chapters? And how does that affect where you are now?
I see in hindsight that the romance that we have around our identity it's thick, right? Like we want to identify as an artist, or for me, like as a drummer, as a whatever. Like there's something, because if you're like I am, I'm still a prover, you know. Like I said, it's never come easy. I've had to really work hard. And I remember I had a boss, you know, and she was, I was working as an engraver at a trophy shop, and she's this super sweet lady, but at the same time, you know, she's just looking out for me, but it was like the wrong thing to say. She's like, you know, nobody really makes money being a touring musician. Like you probably shouldn't go and do that. And so, I just remember being like,
screw you, I'm going to make it happen.
Exactly. So I was like, I'm going to prove her wrong, you know? And so she wasn't the only one, but that's one that stuck out in my brain. And so how do you prove somebody wrong? Well, you have to shift your identity to say, especially when you do prove it to them. Now it's like almost, you're like wearing this armor around you to say, you know what, F you, like I did it, and I'm going to wear the jacket and like do that and show it off or whatever. And so to then step into this role of just doing production, for instance.
And you're saying music production as opposed to.
Yeah. So when I stepped into like the recording studio and off the road, I had somebody say like, do you miss being a drummer? And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't even understand that question. How is that? And it was so insulting to me for whatever reason. And I now I understand it. It's because I had my identity wrapped so heavily into that it was insulting for them to say it that way.
As in but even though you were working as a producer, you had moved over to that different role. Did you still see yourself as a drummer? Were you still holding that identity yourself?
Yeah. And I was very actively still gigging and doing a lot of stuff. So, but I was doing more like corporate things. And it was almost because I had moved into just, at this stage, I was making way more money. I probably doubled my income the first year off the road, just because, again, I was my own boss. I set the gigs I wanted. Like there was no questions anymore. And so it was almost that also added to it. It's like, here you're telling me I'm not this thing anymore. And maybe I'm more that thing than I ever was from like a professional standpoint in terms of financially secure, all that kind of stuff. So it was a hard thing to remove. I think what happened for me is I hired a coach, and we literally had to come to this spot where I said goodbye to that. Like I put a closure on that and no longer hold an identity of being a musician. Do I still play music? Do I still drum? All those things? Yeah. But I no longer put my identity into what I do. What I do is just bits of who I am. It's like I do all these things, but I'm not one thing. And I think as creative people, we tend to want to be one thing. And I think that's actually a very dangerous route in many ways, especially in the current climate of like what's available to us.
I have so much empathy with your story because your story could very well have been my story had I taken different paths. Because, you know, I started out as a musician. I literally started out having a playlist of songs I had to sing before I went to sleep every night. And I was sharing a room with my two older brothers. It drove them nuts. I had to sing all these songs. Mary Had a Little Lamb, Jesus Loves Me, all the things every night. When someone brought a piano into our house, I started picking out notes on the piano. And eventually I started playing Old MacDonald Had a Farm by ear. And then eventually I figured out if I change a couple of these notes, I can make this happy song sound all sad and spooky. I discovered how to play Old MacDonald Had a Farm in C minor instead of C major. And that's when mom said, get this kid some lessons. My whole life, the first 20 years of my life, I was known as Jeff the Piano Guy. And even though I started getting into video production in high school, I had to be the one-man band who did that because I was the only one in my entire high school who cared about that stuff at all. I was still mostly Jeff the Piano Guy. And I figured that was just going to be what I was going to be doing for the rest of my life because that's all I had known. And I was this close to, when I moved out to LA, I went to film school and I was wanting to, I was on the verge of, do I want to get into the entertainment industry or do I want to do the studio musician route? I was this close to trying to be a studio guy playing keys. And just the way things worked out, I dropped out of college. I dropped out of film school as well because it was on my own nickel. My nickel ran out. And thankfully, one of the professors at the film school gave me some folks to contact. And that first contact turned into my first internship as an assistant editor on a TV show. And it's been TV post-production ever since. Even now, ever since COVID, for basically 30 years of my life, like I've been playing music in church, in church contexts. I've been playing piano and all over. And right now, I hardly play piano at all. Yeah. And so it's just, I've never had to actually say I'm no longer a musician. But when you said that, when you talked about going to your coach and saying, I had to come to terms with it. I had to say goodbye to my identity as a musician. There was just something inside me that just went gulp. Because it is so easy to identify what we do with who we are. And if you ever have to say goodbye to that, you have to grieve. Did it feel like you were turning your back on a part of yourself?
Absolutely. My grandfather was a musician. Dad's a musician. My brother's a musician. And I've been very fortunate to work with people that have gone on to do incredible things in their careers as musicians. Yeah. So far as to be like backup singers for Roger Waters, like all the way to that level. And so, it wasn't like I was just turning my back on me. It was like I was turning my back on all these other people. And if you've ever read the book, The Big Leap, anybody that's listening, if you haven't, and you're kind of, in some of these places of like, where do I really take who I am? What am I trying to do with my creativity or my whatever? That book was really helpful because he talks about there's a few different ways that we get sort of stuck. And that was mine, which was that I felt like I was leaving someone behind. For me to step into who I really am fully meant that I was leaving somebody. And that, like I said, that was my family, it was friends, it was whatever. So there was a lot of grief there. And I had to it was almost like seeing that part of me literally die, because I had to say, okay, when I go to these shows now and the band that I was in is playing, I'm no longer that. And that's okay. And that's an interesting thing, but it was also freeing because now I no longer have to go and play that part. I don't have to like show up and be that. Because before there was my own internal expectation of going to that gig and saying hi to everybody and got to make sure that they're all impressed with what I'm doing or whatever. And now it's like, who cares? It doesn't matter. You know, I've chosen where I want to go.
So where are you right now? And what are you helping people do?
What I've found over the years through myself first, as we've kind of outlined, is that creative people want to make a living doing what they love to do. And many of them, me included, never wants to be famous or be like the most recognized. We just want to do something that we really love and make enough money to kind of continue to serve our art or whatever it is that we do. But we do want our stuff to make an impact on people, right? It's not like we just want to sit in our basement and make things for no reason.
You don't want to be Emily Dickinson writing poems to nobody and you die.
Right.
Thankfully, in her case, someone discovered the poems.
Yeah. And then tragically, you know, she never gets to experience the influence that she had. For better or worse, maybe, you know, maybe it's totally fine. But the problem with all that, us wanting that as creatives, is that oftentimes the world has set an expectation of what success looks like and what the vehicle looks like. Meaning, if you're a musician, you need a record label. If you're a visual artist, you need a gallery. If you're a photographer, you need an agent. You know, whatever it is, there's somebody else that says what you get to do and how you get to approach your career if you are going to be a creative in whatever your medium is. And so what I've done is built a program that helps people really identify what success is for them and help them to then build an audience around their creative work. And then alongside that creative work, develop some sort of product, you know, where they don't have to work their ass off for a $5 Patreon model, you know,
right.
That because I think that model itself is demeaning in many ways to artists. Not that Patreon is, but there's a mindset that is in that. When you're living in that world, you're automatically saying, what I make is worth $5. And so my goal is to help artists really change the way they see their own internal worth first, and then build it from there.
That is clearly easier said than done, because when you when you see Patreon and you see all these millions of people on there and all these voices saying, hey, you can get your crowd here on Patreon. You don't have to do all the work. And, you know, you get all this and this and this for $3 a month. I mean, that just on the surface of it, that seems like instantly devaluing one's creativity. Yeah. So how do you, but at the same time, it's hard to say that that's a completely bad thing, because Patreon has paid out millions upon millions upon millions of dollars to creators to do their thing. So how do creative people elevate themselves beyond that, being satisfied with that level of income?
It starts with seeing that your work has value, and seeing that you are really the thing that has the most value, that it's not just your work. Right? Because the work itself is very commoditized in many ways. If we look at music, for instance, you know, I can open my phone and stream whatever the heck I want, and an artist may make a quarter of a penny or a tenth of a penny from that stream, right? And I can go on Instagram and see any sort of beautiful visual art, or I can go, you know, whatever it is. It's all commoditized. It's just anywhere. But what isn't is the connection to that artist. And that's what's the most interesting to me about the world that we live in now, is that I can develop a connection with someone and the work that they make in a way that was never available before. And that creates an opportunity for me to support in different ways. And so for the artist, for the creative, they first have to see that that is possible. And I think that is, like, as you said, probably the hardest part, is just helping people come to this place of, the things that you see aren't the only options, and your art may not be the only option. You may have other options that are inside you that you would have never even thought of that you can make alongside your art. Diversifying your income streams the same as any business would, or, and I think a lot of that has to do with figuring out what your real zone of genius is.
Zone of genius. How does one figure that out? You might think you have a zone of genius, but if you want to be compensated for it, you got to find some overlap there, clearly.
Totally. Yeah. I had my brother go through this, and this again comes from that book, Gay Hendricks, The Big Leap.
Sure.
Where he talks about, so if you're jiving with this idea and you're listening, go read that book. I guarantee you're going to love it. So he talks about asking, what do you do when you're kind of in your strongest place? Like, what are you doing when you are having the most fun, when you're the most engaged? And then looking a little deeper and saying, like, what's the exact task that you're doing? And then, like, what's your mindset? What's happening in this moment? And I'm paraphrasing it to my own thing. So for instance, when I was being a producer, that was my favorite job at that point. And I didn't understand why. I thought it was because I was helping these artists sort of open a new toolbox that they hadn't thought of, where we'd pull out, different gear and say, let's try this, let's make this texture, or this, like, whatever. Mm-hmm. And that was a piece of it. So when I identified the thing I was doing, it was that. It's like, okay, we're in this room, and this is like, I'm with people, and we're thinking about different ways to approach the art.
And that sounds cool. sounds like you're saying that was just a symptom. That wasn't really what was getting you going internally.
Yeah. And so then it's like, well, what's the mindset here? And what I started to look at is, like, what are parallels in my life where I get sort of that same buzz, And when I started to look, it was like, oh, it's the same feeling when I'm in a room full of people and we're, like, talking about spirituality, or we're talking about, we're just going deeper on things, we're like, and then I got that even further to where it's like, we're wading through the unknown. Like, that's what's really happening. We're, like, in this world of, I don't know what's going to happen next. And that's amazing to me. Like, that feels really fun, So this was some work I did with my coach. And so we were talking through this, and she's like, okay, so what does that look like then if you had a business? I'm like, oh my gosh, just like you said, like, oh, how do you connect those dots?
Well, other than the fact that being in business is by definition discovering the unknown day by day.
Totally. Yeah. So for me, it's like a constant rush, which mm-hmm. makes sense why I was always a freelancer and doing all those things. Mm-hmm. But to do it with people, or to have a business, it was like, well, I could make a course, and I had made a course at the time, but I was like, that doesn't do it for me. I'm not wading through those things. And then I had done some other stuff where I was kind of walking people through, like, more hands-on, but with a curriculum. And it's like, that's not it either. And what I had to figure out was that it had everything to do with making sure I was in the room with people and asking questions. And so I was like, how do I build that into this thing that I already know about, which is the business of creativity and art? And then who do I understand the most? I understand artists the most. And so I just kind of built everything around it and said, well, how would I want this to look that allows me to really be in my zone of genius where I'm getting the most energy? And I just designed the whole program around that, where now the curriculum is all pre-recorded. They go through that on their own. And then we just meet once a week, and there's no specific dialogue. They go through the curriculum at their pace, and there is no set for the calls. It's like, you want to talk about, feeling afraid to show up on video, and that's not in the curriculum. Let's talk about being afraid. Like, what's really in there? What's going on? And so the dialogue in these office hours calls is way more open and free form. And I'm finding that creatives are like really enjoying that because you never feel like you're behind, which was also a big part of how I wanted to build the culture, is like, because creatives often feel like if they're juggling their day job and trying to make stuff, they feel like they're always behind. And so that's like my motto in everything. You're never behind. You're right where you need to be.
So there's the idea of finding your zone of genius. And then how do you begin to help people think about turning that into finance? How to get that to happen where the value exchange means money coming back to them.
Totally. So this is where you get much more into all that other stuff is a lot of internal struggle, and it takes time. And so if you feel like, well, I don't know if I quite get this yet, that's totally cool. That's part of the process. Allow it to take time and don't feel this pressure to make it all perfect, right? Because you can have something that's profitable, that's not perfect. And you know this as well as we are constantly going to be revising whatever we make. And so I think that's step one, is going into it, normalizing that things will always shift. They will always change. So be willing to try, be willing to experiment. And then we look at, okay, now we get into this basic branding idea, basic value, like what's the thing that you want? So that's what I ask first. What do you really want from this? Now you know what you want to do, what excites you, but what do you want? It's not about just building a business, but what is it really? Is it, for me, I get to spend more time with my family because I have this thing that allows me to have more freedom. I get to make money that really serves a mission where I can give back to my church, give it to people who need it, like that kind of thing. And then once you identify why you want it, then I think it's important to identify, well, then if you're going to do this with somebody for potentially the rest of your life, or at least till you get sick of it, who's the most ideal person you'd ever want to do that with? Who do you want to hang out with, And that's why mine was artists, because I'm like, it's just so easy for me to go deeper with those people right away because I understand them the most. So figure that out. And usually when you just identify, who do I want to hang out with, you'll start to see a correlation of, I hang out with these people and I identify with these people because we have similarities. As Seth Godin puts it, people like us do things like this. So then you look at it and say, okay, what are those things that we do? What problems does that person have that I've already maybe worked through that I can help them with? And then you start sparking all these ideas of like, okay, I never thought that I could monetize that, or I can make that a thing, and then what I look at is kind of boiling that down to, I wish I knew the guy's name, but what it was termed as like the 5 1s, where you have one person and you identify that person, you solve one problem for them with like one product. You have one conversion that you get that person into your thing, and you have one content strategy that converts them, and you do that for 1 year. Right. So if we flip that, for 1 year, we're going to put content out, we're going to convert them somehow, and then we're going to help them solve a problem. And we're only doing that for one person. And when you think of it that way, it becomes way more simplified to say, okay, if this is my person, if this is my thing, then I'm going to boil all that down. But the hard work is in that first bit because it's so heady. You hear me talk about it. I think a lot of people, that's my drive. A lot of people skip over the fact that there's a lot of internal work that has to happen to even believe that it's possible to go into those things, at least for creatives, I think.
Something I've been thinking about recently is that a lot of people talk about the idea of imposter syndrome and how prevalent it is. So when people go out and they say, well, hey, I'm going to offer this product or this service to the world, who am I to be doing this kind of a thing? The irony with me is I have never, I won't say I've never felt like an imposter. That is way farther down on my personal mental issue checklist, but mainly because the stuff that I have always wanted to teach to the world, I've been doing it at a super high level in terms of storytelling and communication in the storytelling capital of the world for over 2 decades. And my challenge has been, I need to get over myself and I need to stop thinking that people should be me or people should be Hollywood, when the fact of the matter is people are far more interested in being upgraded versions of themselves. I mean, that's something that I've had to wrap my head around. And it's taken a long time, even just to get to a point where I could verbalize that. Yeah, but dude, that's literally taken years for me to be able to say that.
Yeah. Yeah. I can totally see how that would be the case, because I think of somebody like a Gary V or, and he's since sort of changed his tonality in a lot of his communication. But, the early Gary V was very like, move fast, go hard, do it all. Right. And it makes sense because that's him. And there's a whole culture of people that live by that. And I think that's cool, but I'm like one of those people where it's like, I think so many people don't want to be the 1%, they want to just really enjoy it. And Gary says that too. And it's like, well, I'm down to be here for those people that are just like, I want to level up who I am. I want to be the best that I can. And the end result doesn't matter near as much as the process, because that's what I get off on is like, how do we constantly refine the process and really enjoy it and make it fun and exciting and challenging and all those things at the same time. What I think is interesting is that a lot of the creatives, again, they boil it down to their identification is around the thing or the medium or whatever, so I make visual art or I do digital art or whatever. My wife's a great example where we think a lot about, really it's your life is one side of the circle. If we're in a Venn diagram situation, you have your life on one side and you have your creativity on the other. And where those two things intersect is really where it's magic, because people are going to get excited about that because now they feel like they know you. Now we're getting into all those social media terms of like the know, like, and trust. How does that happen? Well, they trust you and know you as a person, and they feel like they identify as somebody they'd want to hang out with. So for instance, my wife started making these drawings to cope with postpartum depression. That led with her building this community of over like 20,000 people on Instagram and starting just getting into this whole culture of moms that were helping each other. And she got hired by Netflix and got written up in Board Panda and all these other things, got cold called by 2 publishers about potentially doing a book. And then COVID happened and none of that, of course, was able to, but I had to tell her like, nobody gets cold called by a publisher. Like that's amazing.
That's insane. By the way, so, who is your wife and how can people find her? Just for anyone who's wanted to know this.
Yeah. So Momming with Truth on Instagram is how you would find her. Yeah. All
right.
And so she's going through kind of, a similar thing right now where she was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and we're both 40. So getting diagnosed with ADHD at 40 is like, oh, okay, now we're pulling the wool back here on a whole other layer of things. And so she's figuring out how to sort of redefine what her art does and how it aligns with her life and all those things too. But it starts there with like, where does my life fit in with my art? And then your art can go anywhere, right? That's what makes it so cool. Now we don't have to like stick to one thing. We can move around because it revolves around our beliefs, who we are, and what we're all about.
And none of that happens without the internal work.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The first 2 months of my program is all internal, bunch of questions. Like we really try to like dig into those things. It's really important to me.
So if you'll let me get a little meta here. If people,
not to be confused with Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, exactly. Congratulations, dude. You've your company with its horribly tarnished brand, changing its name, has now taken over a word. So to get a little self-referential, if you will, or mentally self-referential. I don't know if that's the same word. Let's just say, to get a little bit meta here.
Yeah.
So For people wondering, how has it worked for you? How have you started building an audience, and how have you started building a community? I mean, one of the big things that you talk about is getting your first 1,000 true fans. How have you gone about getting an audience and turning those audiences into fans and then promoting products to them? What's that process look like for you?
So again, it starts with identifying what I really want, how I want to communicate with them. What do I want my relationship with them to be? So I start there. Mm-hmm. And for me, it's like, I want it to be personal. I want it to feel exciting. I want them to feel like I'm accessible. That's very different from how a lot of people approach social media, right? Mm-hmm. They say, how do I scale this and have my assistant do all the work and do all the posting? And I'm like, no, I don't want to be that. Like, I truly want to be accessible to people. And so I had to start there, because that's going to make a big difference on how I approach what I make. It also means that's going to take up a lot more time. And it also means I don't have the capacity to have bazillions of people. And some might say that that's a cop-out phrase of like, oh, well, here you are with a small audience or whatever, and that's your way of like copping out. I actually love that. I don't know why we're so afraid of having a small audience. I don't know why we're so afraid to serve a small audience. So that's what I lean on is, here's how I want to show up. Here's who these people are, and here's what they need. And I know that my audience, they want to know, how do I post online? How do I make a course? How do I develop, whatever. They want those things, but they also want somebody to see and recognize that they have legit fears, right? And what I call fears is false evidence appearing real, right? They have these things that come up where it's like, if I do this, so-and-so is going to think I'm an idiot. Yeah, he might, right? He might. But what does that really do for you? What is the cost of you not going out and showing up for your audience? What's the cost of you not making your art? Because you're worried about Jimbo over here saying that you've like sold out. I don't know, but we need to touch on that, because nobody else is talking about that stuff from my perspective. And so I know that my people need to talk about those fears. They need to work through like, hey, I have a hard time showing up on video. What can I do here? I have a hard time being emotional or being vulnerable online, where I think vulnerability is a big part of being an artist. They also say, I don't want to be an influencer. And I'm here to tell them, if you want to be an artist, you need to have influence. Like, an influence is not bad. Yeah. So it's about reclaiming some of these things that I think much of the social media landscape has, to go back to Zuckerberg, sort of taken over, and for better or worse, made it very clinical and sucked the heart out of it. And so I'm like, how do we sort of take the turkey baster and like re-inject some of the excitement and what our real creativity is into making content and into all these other things, so it's not just another thing I'm obligated to do. One of the things my coach says is like, and I say this all the time now, shout out to Lennon Bone, is obligation is a breeding ground for resentment. I mean, come on. Like, how many times do we feel obligated to like make a post online? So I'm like, we don't want obligation. We want excitement. We want to like show up and be there for those people.
Once you figure out how you show up, then how do you turn that into income?
So the big thing for me, like my process, for instance, is all about the personal connection. Mm-hmm. So once I get people into, let's say, Instagram. So if I walk you through my own personal process, people find me on Instagram, for instance, immediately I send them a video. Hey, thanks so much for being here, right? And then I have a free course that I give people. That's very standard. In this free course, though, I give a lot of information. I'm like, I'm not going to give this like cookie cutter thing. I want to be the person that feels like they're there and like they're really trying to help. And so I give them the free course. And in my free course, I say, if you don't like it, I want you to contact me and I'm going to Venmo you $10 right away. because
nice.
I want you to know that I care that much about like you getting something that makes a difference in your life. They take the course. I also do a challenge, which is like a week-long thing. And I've had a bunch of creatives say like, nobody goes this deep in the stuff. You're giving us all the answers. And that's my thing, and I learned that from Tim, to be honest. Tim Schmoyer is like the best at saying, I'm not going to skimp on giving the info, like, cause it's not about the info. For me, it's like, okay, give the info away. And then when you come and work with me, that's what you really are there for, is like, it's an opportunity for us to connect more. So when I make a sale with people, I'm not selling just the information. I'm saying, you're going to be in there with me. I'm there to support you. That's what I'm here to do. I'm here to truly be there and be a part of like your whole journey. So I think that makes the difference, because most people, they feel like that's not possible, but social media, all that stuff, there's a person on the other side of the screen, right? And yeah. I think that's really important to remember.
For sure. So you show up, they engage, they get on an email list, you give them a free course, and then you offer more things via email. Is that the mode?
More things via email. Usually there's like a big challenge, this like week-long challenge with live Zoom calls, and again, like opportunity to be there with me, ask me questions. And I give that all up for like 5-6 days, and then say, hey, if you want to keep doing this, I have a program and you can come do it with me for a year. And I'll walk you through these steps to growing your audience by 1,000 people. That's what I guarantee, is that I'll help you grow your audience by 1,000 people. And then if I don't, you can work with me for free. And then in the midst of that, I'll also help you develop a product, that works for you. And it's a 6-month program, but we do it over a year so that they don't, again, feel like they're behind. They have a full year to go through it and be in the coaching calls and all that stuff.
So here you are as a creative, you have this thing that you love, you have people you want to share it to, you start showing up and you start asking for permission to engage with them. They say, yes, I'm interested. You keep engaging, you make further offers, and there you go. You have something that you love, and you're putting value out into the world, and financial value is coming back to you in exchange.
Yeah. What you're getting here, if I could be completely honest with myself, is I'm not good at the like, it's A, B, C, D, and you're done, because I just don't think it's like fully that. I think we all have our own journeys through these things. So when I look at all these things, it's like, yes, exactly what you said. How do I give somebody the most value I possibly can? And by value, I mean connection. How do I make them feel seen and heard by me as much as possible? And if I do that, they'll hopefully want to work with me. And a lot of creatives are going to say, well, how do I know that I'm worth this much money? Or how do I know that whatever is worth this much? Here's the thing, you don't, right? But you don't get to decide. They will decide. You set the price, the market decides the actual value.
Right.
And that was a big freedom thing for me, where it's like, okay, I'm not afraid to charge more money now. And then I just try to have as much integrity as possible to say, well, if this isn't working for you, then, how do we make it right? And I think that's like, I almost try to oversimplify everything to the point of just what would make me feel really good if somebody did this for me. Yeah. And that's just what I try to do.
Dude, it is so refreshing to hear that verbalized, because when I was first learning about online business, it was about 12, 13, 14 years ago when online marketing was right at the beginning of all the hypey, spammy garbage that you just wanted to take a shower after hitting a landing page.
I know.
And and when you put that together with me not having figured out a lot of stuff about myself and what I was really wanting to figure out and what I was wanting to bring to the world, and then you go and you talk to these people who are saying, well, this is the hypey, spammy garbage you got to put out there because that's what's working. That's what the data says. It's just, it is. Yeah. That's a significant part of my own frustration for multiple years learning about online business. So it is so refreshing to hear that things are returning back to real people connecting with real people.
at the risk of sounding braggy, it works, right? Like I didn't know either, to be frank. When I was about to step into this, it's like, is my audience big? No, I have an email list of 700 people. People are like, oh my gosh, wow, okay. The reason I'm saying this is because you don't need a big audience to make it work.
You don't need an email list of 100,000.
No. And so in the last 3 months, I've made close to $25,000. May not be a ton of money, but for me, that's a lot of money, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and again, this goes back to this idea of, I don't need the biggest. I just need something that really serves me and other people really well. And that's exciting to me. So those are the people I'm after, is like, how do we make that happen? And then does it work inside the program? Yeah, I just had a husband and wife duo who emailed me a couple days ago, and they're having their first 10K month on January 11th.
Fantastic.
Like 11 days in, they've made $10,000 selling their art. Like incredible, right? And others that are doing thousands of dollars sales days and all these things. And it's not you won't get from me a bunch of tactics. And I think it's important for people to understand that. I'm not about the tactics. I'm about starting with you and your person, and then defining what the tactics need to be for you and your person, because it's not one size fits all.
Mm-hmm. If people are hearing this conversation, then they say, tell me more. You mentioned that free course. If they wanted to get their hands on that, where should they go?
Take the free course, go to stopthestarvingartist.com. And again, it's not about getting you on my email list. If you want to immediately sign off the email list, I don't care. And if you want to be like, take the course, and if you don't learn something from it, hit me up. Like DM me on Instagram and I'll pay you $10. I don't even care.
That is crazy, dude.
Just keep looking for Stop the Starving Artist. So for better or worse, I started a new YouTube channel. It's under that name. You can find me on Instagram for that. And I have a podcast as well, which I would love to get you on. So talk some story.
Awesome. Make sure to connect with Lennon in the links in the show notes or the video description. And if you want help applying these kind of ideas to your own content, then consider joining us in the Green Room. It's our monthly membership that we have here at Story Greenlight that's all about helping creators unlock the next level of impact in your content and in yourself, surrounded with a community of creators like you. You can try out the Green Room for a month for free, and you can get started right now at the link in the show notes or the description below. I'll see you there. I had this whole thing where I was doing some research on bad dad jokes. It was things like, I'm worried about my calendar, because its days are numbered. And then I was going to say, you know what? I have a Rodecaster here. I need to use these sound effects things. I need just something worthy of, Oh, well, maybe this can be an outtake at the end of the episode or something.